Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Today I think I'm going to make something kind of sparkly and pretty, but also something relatively simple. So I picked out a pretty rose quartz kind of rectangular cushion cut, and I think I'll make a little setting for it and a simple band. Maybe throw in a little texture and we'll see how it comes out. In my mind I think it's going to be pretty, but I guess we'll find out the hard way. Before we get started, I wanted to thank some people. I have two new patrons, Ellen and Nikki W. Thank you for signing up. I really appreciate your support. I think you will find that my Patreon is a great place with a whole bunch of really cool people, so I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. I do appreciate all of your support, and that really helps out with the channel, so thanks a lot. My other group are my YouTube subscribers, and I have a bunch of those now. We just passed 23,500 and some, I think, and that's amazing to me. I never expected to have that many followers, so thank you for that. I really appreciate the heartfelt comments I get from some people, and it's really very moving sometimes. Thank you for that. I also really appreciate the kind contributions like the Buy Me a Coffees, the Super Thanks, the people who bought my merch, people who buy my ebooks. I really appreciate that. All of that stuff goes towards making this a sustainable channel, so thank you for that. All right, well, let's get started on this project. Some days I have the gift of gab and some days I don't. I'm not sure I do today, so apologies if I don't. But this is one of my design idea sketchbooks. You can get them on my merch store, and there's a number of different versions. This particular one has a gauge to inches to millimeters conversion chart on the back, which I find useful. The other ones have some different information regarding metalsmithing. The thing I like about them is it's a great place to draw up your designs and keep track of them. So every time you want to go revisit something you did a long time ago, have a nice place to look and notes about what you did and things like that. So I think it's pretty useful. It's improved my outcomes, I think, just by keeping a record of things and drawing them up in advance. They also have this dot matrix in the background that's useful for me because I don't draw things very symmetrically if I don't have some sort of a guide. So, but this is kind of what I had in mind today. I picked out this pretty rose quartz. It's a cushion cut, kind of a 12 by 10, and I think it'll be pretty. I was going to do kind of a simple prong setting like this, and I think I can achieve this kind of a band just by doing sort of a bow tie shape. And I was thinking maybe I'd sometimes do a kind of a hammered texture with the edge of my chasing hammer that's kind of linear. I might do that along the outside edge here and see how it looks. I think it'll contrast nicely with the sparkliness of the stone, and the setting itself I'll leave shiny, so we'll see how that looks. It's an experiment. It'll be fun. We may or may not like the outcome. We'll see. But I'm going to use, the materials I'm going to use is just 16 gauge square and 12 gauge square. 12 gauge square, if I remember, is 2 millimeters. 16 gauge square is 1.3 millimeters. So I guess I should have written that one down. I think first what we need to do is make a setting for this stone. And I'm going to do a really simple one. I'm going to do just some a base that's exactly the same shape and size as the stone, or pretty close. So that if I set the stone on top of it, I'm not going to be able to see it, but it goes along the border perfectly. If that makes sense. It's completely invisible from the top except through the stone. And then we're going to add some prongs sticking up from the sides of them, cut them off. And I should be able to mount that on this band here once it's shaped. And then I think I'll probably saw out the inside so the stone has a little room for the pavilion to sit down in there. And I think that should be deep enough, because it'll be sitting up like that. And then we got an additional 12 gauge thickness, which is about 2 millimeters. So that should work. And in theory, anyway, in my mind, it'll work. I guess we'll find out for sure. But the first thing we need to do is make a base for this thing, and then we'll solder some prongs onto it and make a super basic prong setting. If you've never done a prong setting, this would be a pretty easy way to start. It helps if you have some kind of a soft surface like magnesia block or one of these kiln brick kind of pads that are soft and you can poke things into. This is what we'll use when we get to that stage. It's starting to fall apart here. I need to break out another one. I have a second one. I think I'm going to manually shape this. Don't want the solder joint to be on a corner though. I never do that if I can help it. I'm going to use this as a guide to help me know where to get the bend to be when I start bending this around here. Keep in mind when you're bending square wire sharply like this, it has a tendency to try and twist sideways on you, so you need to periodically kind of correct that, otherwise it'll get out of hand. Kind of, we're getting pretty close, I think. I recognize that the shape doesn't look right now, and that's okay because I'm going to get it soldered and then it'll be a little bit easier to shape. If you haven't been to my channel before, I use primarily hard silver sheet solder. I use a liquid flux that I dribble on with a dropper bottle. My torch is a Silversmith model. It's for acetylene air torch. It pulls in atmospheric air through these holes to mix with the gas. It produces a flame that's not as hot as oxyacetylene because it doesn't have pure oxygen being pushed into the flame, but it's much hotter than a propane or a butane torch. So that should be pretty close, I think. If anything, it's going to be just a tiny bit small, and that's okay because then I'll be able to cut some kind of notches right at the base to accommodate that girdle. It sticks out just a tiny bit. So I think next, I'm going to take my rotary tool and we'll use some burrs to create kind of a beveled edge down there for the girdle to sit down deeper in. So let's do that next. I'm using a ball burr to start with. Okay, I've got a taper on that. I'm going to clean it up with a file a little bit so it's smoother. Okay, so I pinned this down upside down with the with the carved out part facing downwards. And I'm going to try and right where I've marked all these different marker marks, that's where I want to put my prongs. So these soft pads are handy, but one of the disadvantages is that I buried a portion of the metal inside of this insulating pad, and so that's going to make it harder to get the entire piece up to temperature. So really got to make sure that those prongs get all the way up to the 1450 degrees. This portion here shouldn't have too much problem because it's mostly exposed. These are buried way down deep, so so we want to make sure we get a good solder flow on all of them. So that'll be snug down in there once we cut some notches in the side. We can probably just cut these off at the bottom now, as long as we have a good solid seam there. Okay, well then we can set that to the side for the moment, I think. And then we'll worry about it once it's soldered down. But I think we're good for now on that. Now let's make the band. We're getting the band back together. So I think I'm going to do it in 4 pieces. I'm going to do 2 pieces for that one, and that one, and then just one straight across the ends. That should make it pretty straightforward. So let's cut. I'm going to cut a piece off so it's a little bit more manageable. Let's do some straightening. Okay, so I'm going to make it just a bit longer so that I can accommodate this bend that we're going to do. So let's cut them both about that long, and then we'll trim them down to size as needed. Alright, let's see if we can find the center of these two. And then check our work by flipping this around and lining up the ends. Pretty close. Good enough, I think. My thinking was keeping those from moving much while I was scribing out those lines. And we can cut them off there and just file them. See if I can use my miter vice jig for this. I'm not going to put it in straight because I'm trying to get a slight angle. But if you don't have one of these, these are handy for a lot of things. I'm going to line them up on the pad like this, and I'm going to measure the distance between the two inside ends before I solder them, just to get them as close to symmetrical as possible. Because those two ends are going to be next to each other, so I think if they're not parallel, it's going to be pretty easy to solder. That's actually pretty close. Let's try it. off the excess here. I'm going to spend a little time getting those filed nicely. So I threw this in the pickle for a little while just to get it all cleaned up a bit. Thought it was good. Do a little neatening up of spots. Alright, so let's see how our little texturing thing's going to go. So I like to use the edge of it because it produces a nice I hadn't really thought about it, but this may stretch it out a little bit too. I should have probably figured that in there. You know, hindsight's 20/20, right? Kind of makes it a little sparkly almost. So let's work harden that pretty significantly. So I'm going to anneal that really quick. Annealing, if you're new to this, is just heat up the piece a little bit until it's kind of a reddish color, just a dull red. And it softens the metal back up after you've hardened it by working it. Let that cool off for a minute, and then we'll quench it. This is my plan here. I'm just going to mount it like that. I'm going to go ahead and flux this just because the bottom one's oxidized a little bit. paste solder I'm going to use doesn't really require flux, but so that's what it says anyway. Much of the mass in this piece is in the bottom part, so I'm going to spend more time heating that than the rest of it. Third hand also is a factor when you have this much metal there. It soaks up a lot of heat. I think what I'll do is I'll put a little bit of medium solder on here. A little bit more on here too. I think I got it there. Okay, looks like we're good. I'll let that pickle for a while and then we'll get it cleaned up. Somewhere along the way I'm going to saw out those inside pieces, but then we'll be ready to set the stone after it's all polished. So I'll be back. So after I've sawed that out of there, I realized just how very little metal is holding these two sides together. And so I thought I would insert a piece of 12 gauge between these so that it has a continuous band there underneath the setting, and then I'll cut out the rest of this. So I'm going to use a little bit easy solder for that one. Alright, so I'll get that cleaned up in the pickle after I cut that out. It'll be golden. Okay, so a couple of things that I had to do that I realized after I let it pickle for a while. Even though I had reinforced these spots underneath here, it still was a little bit flimsy this way, so I went ahead and I put a little spacer between those two and soldered them together using some easy solder. And then the other thing that I did is I slid the stone in here, and my prongs weren't perfect. I had one that fell off. I did not get positioned back on very well, so I had to kind of fudge it a little bit to make it look good from the top. And it looks okay, but I can still see it's off a little bit. So here I'm giving myself a B- on this one, but I like the overall idea, and I think if I did another one I could probably pull it off a little bit better, but I think this one turned out okay. So last thing I do after I cut the prongs off to about the right height is I will use a ball burr, which I did on the inside right where the girdle meets these prongs, and then I get it to where it sits in there nicely, and then I cut these off a little bit above the top here, and we bend them in a little bit, and then I cut them off right about midway down these girdle facets here, between the table facet and the girdle. About midway down that, and then I file it down until it's a little bit narrower at the top, neaten it up with an abrasive silicone white wheel, and then use a blue wheel on it, which is a fine wheel, to kind of smooth it out. And I will give it a little bit of a buff up afterwards. But the way that I laid the prongs down is I used my outside of my chainless pliers here and push those down. Give it kind of a little bit of a burnish. So I'll get this with a polishing cloth. I'll shine it up even a little bit more, and then I'll get some better pictures. But that's kind of what I was shooting for. I think that turned out okay. I'm pleased with it in general, except for my, few of my imperfections. But all right, well, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear how you would have done things different, or if you would have, come up with a slightly different design or whatever. It's always a good learning experience for me when I hear other people's ideas too. So let me know. Okay, well, that was kind of the textured bow tie sort of design ring. And I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you go. And I would love it if you take a moment and visit my main channel page on YouTube. I have accumulated quite a collection of content there at 3 per week for the past 3 and maybe 3/4 of a year. So there's quite a bit there. I'm pretty certain that you'll find something else that's interesting or useful over there. I'd love it if you'd subscribe to my channel as well. Before you leave, visit the video description down below. There's some important links there if you want to get yourself one of those nice design idea sketchbooks I talked about at the beginning. Those are available there. There's a link to my ebooks if you want a guide to either 2023's or 2024's video tutorials. Each guide has a page for each video with a link to it, in addition to a picture of the sketch that I drew beforehand, a picture of the final product. There's a list of materials you need to make it, a difficulty rating, however subjective, and some notes I made about the project. Some things like, would I do it differently if I was to do it again, or did I learn something good from it, or things like that. I think it's a great way to have a whole bunch of projects right at your fingertips, and a super nice way to support my channel, so get yourself one of those. Finally, there's a link to my Patreon, which is a really great community of very artistic people who have become my supporters. So there's different tiers of membership. There's a $5 tier per month, which gives you access to my videos without the YouTube advertisements, which is kind of nice. The tiers above that have additional perks that go along with them, including exclusive Patreon videos and live streams, and I just added a top tier level at $50 a month if you're interested. I plan on doing a weekly session where people can drop in on Discord and chat with me or ask me questions, or we can talk about whatever each week, and that'll be available to those top tier members. So check it out. I'd love your support no matter which membership you choose, but I appreciate you watching, so take care. Thanks for watching. Happy silversmithing.